Okay, so today joining us, we have UFO researcher Grant Cameron, who I'm told is one of the top UFO researchers in the world, and also among other things, really into consciousness and all things paranormal. So thank you so much for coming to hang out, Grant.
Well, thanks, Dee. I appreciate your interest in what I'm doing.
Yes, very much so, very, very much so. So why don't you just introduce yourself and maybe tell us about your UFO experience and what got you into all this?
Okay, I'll just give you a quick background on how my career has taken fold. I had a sighting in 1975, had no interest in UFOs. I was interested in Edgar Casey. But what happened was Winnipeg had in the newspaper sightings that were occurring in Carman, Manitoba, which is about 35 miles southwest. And we used to drive around Winnipeg, and that's all we did, drive around with nothing to do. And I said to my friend, I said, why don't we go out to Carman and see what everybody's looking at? So I really had never thought about UFOs or extraterrestrial life or anything. I just figured, let's buy a lottery ticket and see if we can win. So I realized that we probably wouldn't see anything, that everybody else would see something, we wouldn't see anything. We drove out to the town. This was in the middle of May 1975, just after CKY TV here in Winnipeg had gotten a film. They'd captured this thing jumping off the ground. So it had gone viral in Winnipeg. It was a pretty big story. And we went there, we drove around the town, and I just talked to my friend about this about a week ago. He doesn't remember this part of the story, but we drove into town, out of the town, into town. We're looking around like, what's everybody looking at here? And we didn't know what everybody's looking at. We could see, stars and planets. And we said, well, whatever they're looking at, it's not very spectacular. My friend said, we'll drive back into town one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home. I said, fantastic. It's been a total waste of time. So we turn around to go back in, heading west into Carman, and it appeared from the left to the right. It was down low. It was fairly close. It was not a light in the sky. It was an actual object. And nobody in the car said, I wonder if that's what they're looking at. Everybody just went, oh, there it is. Everybody just instinctively knew this is what people were talking about. And there's some actually bizarre synchronicity. There's a bizarre synchronicity. It just happened. I went back with a film crew that came out of Toronto. And I haven't been back there. I've only been back once in 40 years. So we went back there, and I did the whole shtick about how I'd first seen it standing on this road, and it was going behind the school buses, and I ran off the road to get behind these school buses to see it fly away. And I told this whole story, and so there was my friend Larry was in the front seat, and the guy that was in the back seat, my friend didn't remember this, was Bob Rondo. So this is last weekend. I was out there, and I'm describing to this film crew where I'm standing on the road and stuff. And that's the first of a number of sightings I had, 5 close sightings I had. But the first one, and I said, okay, and these are the people in the car. We got into Carman, and later that night we went up into Miami, Manitoba to see what was flying around or whatever. And suddenly my friend Larry sends me a message. He said, I've sent you an email. Read it. There's an obit you need to look at. And I opened up the obit, and it was Bob Rondo's obituary. And it was like, just sort of shocked me. It was like, wow. It's like, so anyway, we had the first sighting in May of 1975. Then I dragged all my friends out 2 nights later, and they all took off. There was 28 people on the road. The people were all over the place trying to see this thing. So where I was outside of Carman, there was about 28 people. My friends were there. And they all went back. They said, we're tired. We're going back to Winnipeg for pizza. And I said, no, stay. You got to see this. And they left. About 15 minutes later, about 12:45 in the morning, this thing flew right at us the second night. And I just fell off the edge of the earth. I mean, I just couldn't believe that. I'd seen it twice. And the second night it had changed. So it was jumping around the sky as some young kids that I interviewed in Carman had described, like a bouncing ping pong ball. It was like this flashing thing jumping around in the sky. And as it came closer, it was the same object I'd seen the first night. So then I decided, well, why is nobody investigating this? So then I decided I was going to go and talk to the people. So I would go around the town and I would investigate people. I'd say, oh, Dee, I heard you had a sighting. And you go, who told you that? And I'd say, oh, so-and-so told me you saw something. That was really nothing. And then I'd say, well, what was it? And then they would tell me it was a flying saucer sitting in the middle of the road or some bizarre thing. And then at the end of the interview, it was always the same thing. It was like, I wasn't the only one that saw it, And then they'd give you like 3 or 4 or 5 names. And I'd go to those 5 people and I'd say, all right, someone said you saw something. Who said I saw something? And they would do the same thing. And I had this huge list of people. So I did a manuscript. This would be, I guess, maybe 76 or 77. Sent it to Toronto. They looked at it. Nobody really was all that interested. And then the local publisher here in Winnipeg, who should have published it because it was a big story. It was a well-known story. Said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And I went, what? Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe it. I thought, wow. And at that point, I gave up on sightings. I've never really followed sightings after that because I said, this is a total waste of time. As I described it in the book, sightings are things that you can tell your children when you grow old and gray, but it really doesn't prove anything to anybody. You have to really see it for yourself, or you have to, get some evidence. So all I was interested in, the second night as it was flying away, I was looking at it and it was like, what's it? I said, that could be from another planet. I'm going, like, wow. And then I'm thinking, what's it doing? It was just like flying along. I wasn't doing anything. It was just flying off into the northeast. So all I was interested in then was not to try to convince anybody that this is for real, but I figured somebody has to know. I'm from Winnipeg. I'm just some little small guy. Somebody's got to know what's going on here. And so I started this investigation. I went to the Canadian government, to what they had done in the early 1950s. That led to the former president of Penn State University, who had 14 honorary doctorate degrees and was chairman of the top military think tank in the United States. And he knew what was going on, and he was playing rhymes and riddles with us and say, leave it alone, there's nothing you can do, you're up against the windmills and things like this. And that led to the president of the United States. He was going to put his files at the Truman Library. And that's when I went to the Truman Library, and I'm looking for Dr. Eric Walker's files. And then I thought, the president's the biggest guy. He's the most powerful guy. He's got to know what's going on. So I said to the Truman Library, I said, so what do you got on UFOs? And then they had, in 1952, if you remember back, there was these sightings over the Capitol. And it happened 2 Saturdays in a row in July of 1952. And in the first one, the story had gone out over the newspapers that Truman had given a shoot down order, that if it doesn't land from now on, you shoot it down. So a lot of people sent telegrams into to the president saying, don't shoot it down, Mr. President, don't shoot it down. And there was even a story that Einstein had a discussion with the president during this period. And Einstein said, Mr. President, anybody who can come across millions of miles of space will know how to protect themselves once they get here. Don't start something you can't finish. And apparently that was the story that for the first time, Give Him Hell Harry decided better not to give him any hell. So I went there, and then I did the presidents for a couple of decades, I guess. I sort of went to all the presidential libraries, and there was some interesting stories about Jimmy Carter having seen a UFO and Reagan seeing a UFO, but there was really nothing in the presidential libraries. And I was sort of, it was like I really wasn't getting anywhere. And then in 2012, that's when my career sort of shifted, where I was watching Colin Andrews, who was the guy who created the term crop circles. And he was lecturing in Phoenix, Arizona. And like UFOs, I really had no interest in crop circles. And it was one of these conferences where it goes from 8 o'clock in the morning till about midnight, or 11 o'clock at night. So you don't go to all the lectures. You decide, okay, I'm going to skip this lecture. I'm not interested. I'm going for lunch, or, I'm going to go talk to somebody or whatever. And Colin Andrews was one of those lectures. I was like, I don't know if I want to go. Maybe I'll go across. Maybe I'll go for lunch. And then I thought, nah, he's a major researcher. I should go in and pay respect and go see what he's going to talk about. So I went in the room, and it was, I just written a book called Contact Modalities, in which I talk about there are different ways to get in the non-local field. There's information that's outside the conscious mind, and there's various ways to get it. And my method has always been to zone out. And that's what happened in this lecture. This is when I first.
What was that?
To zone out.
Oh, zone out. Okay. Yeah.
To daydream or to zone out.
Right.
So I do it. I walk, and I can get downloads by walking. I'll put a headset on, listen to podcasts, and I'll walk for hours. And then you're just sitting there, and you're not really paying attention to what the podcast is, and suddenly this idea will pop in your head. So that's what happened here. Colin Andrews was lecturing, and it really wasn't interesting when he was lecturing. He was lecturing on consciousness, where he was talking about the crop circles may be created by human beings, or many of them. But when he did an investigation of these guys, they would all say, I was sitting in my living room, and this idea of putting this crop circle down came in my head. And then I went and put it in the circle. I went and put the circle down and hoaxed this circle. And they would find out there happened to be a bunch of women meditating in the same field, the same design. And so it was this idea that consciousness, that the beings are creating some circles, and the other circles they're also creating because they're telling the people, the hoaxers, what kind of pattern to put down. So I'm listening to this lecture and I'm not really paying attention. And then I had this like instantaneous download, which I call, you know, like a noetic experience, where people will describe this. The guy who invented the laser had it. The guy who invented the hologram and had it. You know, the Tesla had it when he invented the alternating current engine and stuff like that, or motor. And it was like I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, kaboom! It's like boom, 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 and it comes with absolute certainty. It's like the IEs are there. You don't have to check this. This is how it works. And basically, the underlying message was, it's a consciousness. That's how it works. And so it was like when I saw the thing flying in 1975, I said, somebody's got to know what it was. And that day I got the answer. It was basically, you got to go to consciousness. And I make the joke that in 2012, I couldn't have spelled the word consciousness, and I couldn't have cared less. And yet suddenly it was in my head, and basically it gave me three things that I put in my head. So it wasn't anything new came into my head, but it was things that I'd studied. So I'd gone after the Canadian government, and the Canadian government in 1950 had written a top secret memo about what they'd been told by the Americans. And in this top secret memo, they've been told flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. There's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who are trying to figure out what's going on. And the subject is of tremendous significance to the Americans. The very next line of the document popped into my head while I was watching Colin Andrews. And it basically, the next line of the document, and it's very important because of the timing, it said, and we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And the Americans aren't doing very well because they said if we're working on the problem, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. So this idea like mental, and the thing is that nobody had talked to an alien in 1950. The first contact between a human and an alien was Adamski, and that was a couple days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb in 1952. So in 1950, there was nobody talking to aliens. So the question was, how did they know mental phenomena was involved? I mean, we just barely know that there's things that are flying around, but how do you know the mental phenomena is involved? And the second thing that came into my head was Dr. Eric Walker, who we chased for about 8 years, the former president of Penn State University. At one point, somebody was interviewing him from England and said, Dr. Walker, are there still just 12 people running the show? Like there's idea that there's a control group. And are they all still Americans? And he said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And the guy went, well, he didn't really answer the question. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. Very few people understand how it works. So here was the same thing. It's consciousness. It's like Walker's saying, you've got to know about consciousness. And the third thing that popped into my head was 1993, Ben Rich, who was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works, which has always been rumored to be the aerospace company that tries to back engineer the flying saucer technology with the crash saucers and stuff like that. Ben Rich made a statement at the end of a lecture in 1993 at UCLA to a bunch of engineers that said, we've now got the technology to take ET home. And one of the engineers was a big UFO guy, and he went to him and he said, like, I've been interested in flying saucers. I've been interested in propulsion. How did they get here? How does it work? How does it, and Ben Rich turns around, looks at him and says, yeah, that's a good question. We know about ESP. And this engineer goes, means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben Rich said, that's how it works. Turns around, walks out and gets in his car and drives away. And then later on, there was some more confirmation in terms of Tom DeLonge with To the Stars Academy, where he's at Lockheed Skunk Works. He's in the SCIF, one of these the place where they exchange material, and it's all, very secure. And he's talking to the head scientist. And the head scientist says, how does it work? And Tom DeLonge was hanging around with Stephen Greer at the time. And so he said, well, I think consciousness might be involved. And then the scientist said, now you're talking. And for 45 minutes, that's all I wanted to talk about was consciousness. So I got on this road of consciousness. So I had that first download experience. And I started going towards not so much the sightings, but to talk to the people who are interacting with the phenomena, the experiences. Because in 2013, I was giving a lecture on consciousness, one of my first lectures on consciousness in Phoenix, Arizona, actually at the same conference that Colin Andrews had spoken at. And I was approached by the woman who runs the big Phoenix UFO group. She said, you still going to talk to Pam? And I go, yeah, I guess so. I don't know what there was. I figured I must have agreed to talk to some woman or whatever. It's like, okay, whatever. She says, well, she's coming to my house on Monday and you can talk to her. So the woman, this Pam, she's in her 70s, comes to the door on Monday. She said, what did Stacy tell you about me? I said, I don't know. I'm just supposed to talk to you. So that's good. Comes walking in and starts talking about, I've been abducted and this and that, and I'm psychic. And she's going, the same old stories you hear all the time. It's like, oh, okay, whatever. And then at one point in the story, she says, well, last night I was flying the flying saucer. And I went, you were what? And she says, I was flying the flying saucer. And I was ready to say, you are absolutely nuts, lady. I mean, you are. I've heard a lot of stories. You're nuts. And I said, they let you fly the flying saucer? And she said, yeah, I've flown 3 different models. And I went, so how do you fly a flying saucer? And she says, oh, you do it with your mind. Then I realized why they'd set me up, because there was a consciousness link. That's the whole. And I've now got 50 people, experiencers, who have actually been in the ship, and they'll talk about putting their hands on a panel, on a ball, or on a panel on the wall, and they become one with the craft. The craft is alive. You become one with the craft, and whatever you think is what the craft does. So that's when I got into this consciousness thing, and I started to realize that the experiencers, the people who've been on board the ship, are the people you got to talk to. So a lot of people get into studying the metals. Like you'll see a lot of people now are studying the UFO metals, these pieces that fall. And I go, they're just dropping this stuff. This is not, you don't come across the galaxy and then have little pieces start to fall off the flying saucer. Crazy stuff. They're dropping this stuff just to mess with you. And they're sitting there and they're analyzing this metal. It's not going to get you anywhere. So what? It's strange. It's got bad isotopes. It's whatever. But it doesn't tell you anything. It's not until you talk to the people who have interacted with the intelligence behind the phenomena. So I've spent most of my time doing that. And then the last thing I'll mention is 2017. I do a lot of this walking around. So in 2017, I have very dramatic noetic experience. So I'm walking, and you're in Winnipeg, so you'll know. I'm walking. I'm in South End near the Bishop Grandin Bridge, I think, where you had a sighting. So I live near there, and I'm walking downtown. So I'm going. I stop at the Grant Park McDonald's. I have coffee, and then I'm starting head straight north from the McDonald's, heading up there. And I remember exactly what street it happened on. And suddenly, boom! It was like 2012. It's like, oh, get a piece of paper. It's like it's coming into my head. And I get the piece of paper. I take my glove off because it's cold. It's this time of the year. It's cold. Take the glove off, and I'm writing down. And these ideas are coming into my head, one after another, after another. And I know this is real. Write this down. Don't question this, whatever. So I'm writing it down. I get about 15 or 16 of them. And then it sort of stops. Put my glove back on. Put the paper back in my pocket. Start to walk. And all of a sudden it's coming again. Get the glove off. And I'm writing again. And there was 24 things. And basically what it was sort of like a noetic experience that basically describes reality. So it basically says, is the world made out of nuts and bolts? And if it is, well, then that's one world and it has certain rules. But if the world is made out of consciousness, if you've got it wrong, if it's made out of consciousness, that's a completely different world. And the rules all change. And then it's like, is it one life? If it's one life, if you only live one time, well, then it's a certain reality with certain rules and regulations or whatever. But if it's multiple lives, everything changes. Is it random? Is the world random? Yeah, that's one world. But if it's a pattern, if it's following a pattern, that's a completely different world. And what would be the word? Separate? Are things just bouncing, like, are things banging into each other, and that's how things happen, just randomly banging? Or is it all connected? If it's all connected, that's a different world. And so it was that thing that really set me off on this thing, where I was sort of being given this material, and then I would do things like I would, study people who I wrote a book called Inspired, The Paranormal World of Creativity, where I look at people who have these same experiences, like Paul McCartney. The first one I ever got was Paul McCartney. The song Yesterday, which was the most produced song of the 20th century, got in a dream. Woke up and the thing was in his head, and he ran around with this song and telling people, what, you've heard this song before? Because he thought someone else had written it. So that's basically where my career has gone. It's started with UFOs, but now it's more into this whole consciousness thing. And I look at things like psychedelics. I look at things like, people who have noetic experiences, because I believe that you can get in the field, and the material that you get in the field it is accurate. It is reality. And most people who have been in the field will tell you that. And my one experience directly in the field, where people will say it's more real than the real world. So people will say, it's an illusion. It's a hallucination or whatever. It's like, no, it's all the same stuff. It's all the same mind material. And they say you're in the illusion. And until you've been in the field, you can't disprove that, because they're saying this is more real. And the information is the real material. The stuff we're having here, it's like my 2017 download, you think it's this, it's actually this. You think it's this, it's actually this. It's actually the opposite of what you think it is. But when you get in the field, you know, oh, that's like when the 2012 one, oh, that's how it works. It was like, I knew. It was like, oh, that's how it works. So that's basically a sort of a summation of my career, which is now mostly dealing with consciousness.
Yeah. Well, consciousness is probably the most fascinating topic in the entire existence, I think,
Yeah.
because it's so well. And, even when you take that word paranormal, it's actually normal, really,
Yeah.
right? It's all normal stuff. And I watched an interview you had with a woman who had a near-death experience, and she had said when she came back, this isn't the real world.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And
Yeah,
that's where people get the mistake, is that I always talk about people talk about, oh, these people, they're just delusional, or they went to Sunday school too long, and it's like, well, no, you're going to Sunday school too. I mean, everybody, that's what people, one of the things said, is it knowing or believing? So people will say, I know, you just believe. And it's like, no, it's all belief. You just think you know. The only people that can possibly know are the people who've had the experience. As long as you've just had the experience, or the prime example that would be was the rational analytical mind decided that the world was flat.
right,
And it wasn't until somebody brought in new information, or Einstein would say, you can't solve a problem by recycling the same ideas that you used to create the problem. So
right,
before 1492, before Columbus sailed across the ocean blue and came back and said the world is not flat, everybody, all you were doing is recycling the same ideas again, over and over. And it's not until a new idea comes in that you go, oh, that person's making it up. But then if they're not making it up, well, then we got something wrong here. Or the sun goes around the earth. It's like that's very obvious. The rational analytical mind says, no, the sun goes around the earth. I can predict it. I can tell you when it's going to rise, when it's going to set, and it happens every day and stuff like that. But it's not until somebody goes outside the earth and takes a photographs, or you do analysis, that you suddenly realize, no, we were wrong about that. And that's what's happened now, is that we're stuck in belief systems that people can't change. So Max Planck said, people don't change by you convincing them that they're wrong. Science advances one funeral at a time. And I found that in ufology as well, that you can go and try to convince anybody. Like I have access to the Stanton Friedman files. So I went to New Brunswick to look at his files and stuff. Stan spent 61 years, and he liked to debate people. So he would debate Shostak and Oberg and Klaas and Menzel, all these famous skeptics of all times. And you look at 61 years, and he would debate them all, and nobody changed anybody's mind. And
yeah,
that was basically what it is. That people get into a mindset, they think they're open-minded, and they're actually not. They're set in a belief system, and basically you put the material out and hope that some young kid comes along and converts it, and eventually, as with any other idea, the bad ideas die out and new ideas come in.
right. And so could it be that, could both realities exist? Because there's all these people who think that everything's just random, and all this that you were saying earlier, and then you were saying that then there's the people that, so do both realities exist? Because does everything exist? Like, is there a reality where it's all random, it's all doesn't really mean anything? Or do both realities exist, you think? Or that other one doesn't really exist, the one where people just think everything's just random, the Big Bang or whatever was just a fluke? And when you really look at it, how could that possibly be that it's random, really? Because it's so perfect, right?
Yeah, it's just basically a story. So I think the movement is towards the fact that it's not random. So people will say, for example, they'll say, the Bible, it's people, they're so gullible to believe anything, like the virgin birth. Who could possibly believe the virgin birth? And
Right.
now we have hybrids where women, have kids, and they have never had sex or whatever. And so they'll say, this is naive. How can these people possibly believe it? But what is the idea behind the Big Bang? So you say, well, what happened before the Big Bang? And they say, well, it was just a singularity. You mean like the virgin birth? It just came out of nothing? It's like, you can believe that the whole universe came out of nothing, but you can't believe that a woman can have a child out of nothing. And so people get stuck in these ideas. I would say, because I've had a couple of dramatic experiences in my life. One was seeing Dr. Michael Newton lecture. I don't know if you've read the Michael Newton material. Michael Newton lectured at one of these conferences, the same thing. It was one of these lectures I really didn't want to go in, and he wasn't talking about UFOs. And basically, what Newton's material was, he's famous for what's called life between life. He was a clinical psychologist in California who did 7,000 regressions of people. And he kept it secret his whole life. He kept it secret till the very end. He wrote a book called The Journey of Souls. And then he wrote The Destiny of Souls. So Journey of Souls, basically, what he does in his regressions is, and this came through synchronicity things where people in his office suddenly had these experiences, and then he started to follow it. So he takes you to your past life, and then he says, okay, it's your last day of life, and he lets them die. And he says, okay, you're dying, what's happening? And my husband is there and he's crying, or whatever it is, and they're going through the whole thing. Okay, what's happening next? I'm floating out of my body. Okay, what's happening next? And he keeps going, and he gets them in a very deep state of hypnosis, and they go into the spirit world. And everybody says the same thing. So you'll go into the spirit world and people can say, oh, we can make that kind of stuff. There's no way you can make this kind of stuff, because you'll get stuff like they always have a spirit guide with them. And then they get taken, and just before they go into the spirit world, they go into this life review. And there's between 3 and 12 beings, and they have white gowns on, and they're in this huge sort of a big, like a big amphitheater type thing. And your spirit guide stands on your left side behind you. Like, how can you make this up? And that the beings have, the one in the middle has a big, huge, has a medal around him. And then Newton would say to them, okay, so how big was it? Was it as big as a grape, big as an orange, or as big as a grapefruit? And he said, everybody would say the same thing. It's as big as an orange. And then he said, what's on the medal? So how can you make this up? That the middle of the one in the middle has this medal, and it'll have this alien writing around the outside, and in the middle will be a picture of like a pheasant or some sort of thing that means something only to you, that it tells you one of your past lives, and it's very important or whatever. Now, you can't make that kind of stuff up. And so people would describe these things, what happens in the spirit world, how you come back in. And in that thing, it's the idea that it's all planned, that you plan all this sort of stuff. So you and I, before we were born, may have said, oh, okay, Dee, I mean, we're going to meet at Mark Olson's house, and then you're going to do an interview with me, and we're going to do this thing. We make these agreements with people, almost like Shakespeare said, and you wonder whether Shakespeare believed in reincarnation, because he had it down. He said, all the world's a stage. All the men and women are but actors. They have their entrances and their exits, and each man plays many roles. And that's what the Newton thing is that you're playing a role. And the idea, even if you get into sort of mystical literature or psychedelic literature or whatever, it'll be this whole thing. The whole idea of life is to remember who you actually are. You are not Dee Black. You are the person behind. You're offset, and we actually get to believe, oh, we're actually this guy, this character. And we forget that we're an actor on the stage. Or I'll give you an example. My father, who liked to play sort of skeptic with me. He was kind of interested in stuff, but he'd like to play the skeptic. He'd always say, too many questions. There's no answers to any of this stuff. And I go, oh, okay, we'd have these sort of debates. And then 2 days before he dies, his father, who died in 1956, comes to him 2 days before he dies. So he tells my mother, he says, my dad was here today. And my mother says, oh, really? So what do you have to say? My father said, he was just here. That's all you need to know. And the thing is, so if reincarnation is a fact, which it does appear to be a fact, then my grandfather would have lived 1,000 lives. So why does he come as my grandfather to my father? Because if he came as anybody else, my father wouldn't know who he is. So you can screen image anything you want. And that's what the beings will describe. When you start talking about the aliens or whatever you want, the more I think about it, the less I think they're aliens. But
Yeah.
they come in.
What's a better word for them?
I call it the intelligence behind the phenomena. That's the word I use.
Okay, yeah.
Because it and Jacques Vallée, people like that will describe that we only had encounters with beings since 1952. The Greys only appeared in 1961. The reptilians in 1988. Before that, nobody was talking. They're talking about spirits and fairies and stuff like that. And it may just be something that's masquerading. And we just published a book by a guy in Israel who talked about this, where the beings say to him, we don't really have a body. We can come as whatever we want. We can take whatever form we want. You can do the same thing. You just don't realize it. And so they come in, and you will actually get things where a lot of people will, on board the ship, like I'm writing a book about whether it's actually extraterrestrial or not, and I look at all these weird sort of things. So you're on board the ship, and people will ask the question like, so Dee, did it hurt were you scared? Did they probe you? Did they hurt you? And that, all these kind of questions. And when I get someone on I know you're on the board of the ship, and then I ask, did you fly the ship? And then I'll ask stuff like, did the alien have any clothes on? And then the person will go, no, they didn't. And then I'll say, did they have any sex organs? And they'll go, no, they didn't. Now I come to think of it, no, they didn't. And I go, don't you think that's kind of weird? And then I'd say, did they have a belly button? No. And then it's like, did they have a mouth? Well, not really. And then the big one, I asked Betty Andreasen, if you've ever watched Betty Andreasen, who had her first experience in 1946. They've done 6 books on her experiences on board the ship. Her and her husband, Bob Luca, I was interviewing them, and Bob Luca, I said, you saw the being first in 1946? Yeah. And I was like a little kid, 6-year-old kid or 7-year-old kid. And now you're like 80 some years old. And it's like, did the being ever get any older? And he went, no, it didn't. But aliens live a long time. They try to justify it. It's like, and you will ask people, you say, did the alien ever get any older? And they'll go, no, I don't think he ever got any older. He was always the same age. And it's like, well, you got, changed through the whole thing. So if it's a physical being, it should be getting older. And it doesn't. And then you start wondering, like, what's really going on? Or when they float you out of the body, like they take you out and you go, and they say, I'm in my body, and suddenly I'm going through the wall. And it's like, well, is that really a physical experience, or is it like an out-of-body experience or near-death experience? Because they'll describe the same thing, and you start seeing these patterns between near-death experience and abduction experience. So Whitley Strieber, who wrote the book Communion, his wife, they got 200,000 letters after they wrote that book. And these people read all these letters, and Anne, his wife, was looking at these letters. She came in one day to Whitley. She said, Whitley, I'm reading all these letters, and I can tell you, whatever it is we're dealing with has something to do with death. And then you start seeing these bizarre synchronicities that people, for example, the experiences, they'll say, I can't wear a watch. If I touch electronic equipment, it gets wrecked. When I walk under a street light, the street light will turn off. You'll hear these kind of stories. The same thing happens with near-death experience people. They'll say the same thing. I can't wear a watch. I can't wear, I can't touch electronic equipment, stuff like that. So you start thinking, like, is that person having an abduction experience, or are they having a near-death experience? And you start seeing these similarities. Or I'll give you another one. I got a friend, his name is Ron Johnson. So, and he's very, very sick. And he gets taken a number of times, and he describes most of them as out-of-body experience things. And the being that takes him, his name is LB. So LB, he says, takes him into the spirit world 3 times, different levels of the spirit world. And in the one level, he's with his mother. His mother's dead, and he's actually face-to-face with his mother. You can see his mother, whatever. And he's in the spirit world, and there's a building, he says, and he's a Mormon guy. So it looks like a temple, a small temple in the world. She says, Ron, when you die, you're going to get a room in this building. And he says, I go into the building, and he says, I look in, and it's 10 times the size inside the building as it is outside the building. And as soon as he said that, I go, that's what Chris Bledsoe said. Chris Bledsoe, when I asked him, how do you fly a flying saucer, Chris? He said, oh, there's this little egg. The door opens up. I go inside, and he said, it's 10 times the size inside as it is outside. And I'll look outside, and it's a little thing. I'll look inside, and it's big. Terry Lovelace said it was huge inside. It was like 5 stories inside. It was just a craft, and it was way bigger on the inside. So then the question is, that sounds like the same story. So are they having a near-death experience? Are they having an experience on board the ship? Or if you take people who have done DMT, half of people who've done the ayahuasca, the basis of ayahuasca is DMT, will say, I had a being. I was talking to an alien. There was an alien there. And yet they're lying on a bed and they're having this thing. And some of them actually have the experience of being on the table, the abduction experience, being on the table. Right. So that's when you start getting this crossover. And then it comes down to, it's all consciousness. So we're making the mistake that the world is made out of nuts and bolts. It's made out of consciousness. Consciousness is primary, and the beings know that, so they can change. And what happens in that world that they live in, it's much more, as people will describe if you've done near-death experience or meditation or psychedelics, you realize that world is much more plastic, that things can change very quickly. Like in lucid dreaming, you can see someone and say, I don't want you in my dream. I want, and the person will disappear. I want this, and the person will appear. And it's very, very plastic. So they are able to change the world. We think the world can't change, that it's very solid, it's unchangeable, because we're stuck in this belief system. And it's your belief system that changes what you can. So the people who are able to do paranormal things have a belief system where they can do it. It's this belief thing that
Yeah.
influences. So that's basically, I would say there's a lot of things that when you start looking, you realize it's, as I'd say about the UFO phenomena, I would say it's going to be, when we find out what it actually is, it's going to be way less physical than what you think it is. It's
Yeah.
going to be much more spiritual than you think it is, and people aren't going to like that. And it's going to have no hint of capitalism whatsoever. It's all altruistic. And people, and that's maybe what they're trying to cover up, is they really don't want people to
Yeah.
know, like, why are they shutting the nuclear weapons down? Because they're really upset that we got nuclear weapons. And people say, well, they're a threat because they're
Yeah.
touching our nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Like, really? Like,
Yeah.
you need to use your nuclear weapons? You're mad because
Yeah.
you don't get to use your nuclear weapons?
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, we should give them the Nobel Prize every single year if they're shutting down nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So I'd say the phenomenon is going to be very, very complex when you get right down to it. And we can only learn by getting in the field, whether it's through meditation, psychedelics, or talking to the people who have been. Why would you not? Because if you take a look at UFO experiencers and you do the survey, there was a survey done of 3,200 UFO experiencers, 40% say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. Or that 42% said they had mathematical, scientific, or technical material in their head that they did not learn in school. They were given material. And people say, Dee, she was on a ship. It's just anecdotal. She just believes she was on a ship. But if someone says they had the answer to everything in the universe, don't you think you should at least talk to them? Maybe try, maybe they have some information that might help you. And what you find is that these people are given a lot of material and they are being told, how is the game actually played?
Right. Yeah. And one of the things too that is so cool is this whole thing about, like, what is it that is seeing and what is it that is hearing? And these people that are doing these experiments where they're blindfolding children and children can see, and like that actually makes a lot of sense, and it's actually like uh, people who are having near-death experience as well, they can see, like, so there's this whole mystery about seeing is more than just with our eyes, and hearing is more than just with our ears, right? And we can get into those states, but we're just very new at that, right? But people are just starting to explore it now.
Yeah, and that I've done the 5. There's one I just found out. There's one more team out of Russia that does this training, and I'm going to go. And I don't know if you've seen on my Facebook yesterday, I posted a video by Rob Freeman and Wendy Gallant, who are out of Ontario, and they work on it. And they're now using an EEG. And when he's sitting there and he's got this triangle, and he's got his eyes closed, and he's getting the triangle. As soon as he starts to focus on it, it goes to delta. All the waves go up to delta, and you see this change in his brain pattern. And that's the whole thing, is people make these assumptions. You're seeing through your eyes and hearing through your ears. When I saw the blindfold thing, I said, and I still say, this may be the most significant discovery ever made. Because I said, that's how near-death experience people see. Because people will say, oh, when you have the near-death experience, your brain is still alive. They have 30 different explanations to explain this whole thing. And they can still hear and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't really care what you say, whether the brain's alive or the brain is dead. I know for a fact that when they do an operation on someone, they tape the eyes shut so the cornea doesn't get scratched. So the fact that you are seeing, you cannot see with your eyes closed. And these people will describe the doctor, what he's wearing, where they put the false teeth, all that kind of stuff. They are seeing. And that's the whole thing, is you suddenly realize, like, oh, we've got it completely wrong. We have no idea what's going on. And the other thing that I can point out with these, I do a lot of stuff with right brain, left brain stuff, where the idea is, in all these contact modalities, is that your rational analytical left brain, the one that makes you think you're on the stage and you're the actual character and is talking away and all this negative stuff, and D's bad and D's stupid, and it's going in, and you can't get a word in edgewise. When you can shut down the rational analytical left brain, that's when you pop in the field. And everybody described the same thing. So they call it in hypnosis quieting the mind. Well, you're not quieting the mind, you're quieting the left brain, the Mr. Stupid in the left brain that's getting in the way, that says, oh, this isn't real, this is garbage, whatever. And so what happens with these blindfold things is, and Rob talked to me, and Rob and Wendy, and they said, well, we're in our 60s and we can do it. So anybody can do it. And I said, well, yeah, anybody can do it, but kids can do it really good because, and that's why they worked with children, is because before you're about 11 or 12 years old, your left brain is really not that active. You're a right brain. You're like in the female right brain that's tapped into the universe. As soon as you become 12 years old, then suddenly you get this, the ego takes place, and it takes, and you really can't do it. So even though they're able to do it, they're able to read big sort of numbers, they're able to see colors, whatever. You can take a little kid, in 10 minutes you can get that kid to see colors, and you have these little kids who are reading books, and they're actually reading the book, and they're way ahead.
And they're even not even looking at the book, right? Sometimes
they're looking from the side. Yeah. And that's the whole thing. And people say they're peeking through the side of the blindfold, but that's, they make up, and that's where the rational analytical left brain comes in, that the left brain wants to guess. So it says, oh no, you're just making it up, they're looking out of the blindfold. And what the left brain is trying to do is it's trying to return you back to your old paradigm. So when something new comes along and says, oh, Dee saw a UFO, or Dee is looking through the blindfold or whatever, it's like, oh my God, everything I learned was wrong. And then the left brain, there's what's called the left brain interpreter. That's its job, is to fill the hole back up, because there's a hole, and your whole world becomes inconsistent. And it says, oh, don't worry, they're just making it up. They're peaking. It's still a physical world. It's random. Don't worry about it. We're just biological robots in a random, meaningless universe. And you go back to the old worldview. And so that's where I say skepticism comes from, is from the left brain. And when you can shut that down, and that's why I did a whole thing on music and UFOs. And that was my sort of guess as to why would, I was given a message by Chris Blutzer, the experiencer, from his beings called the Guardians. They had a message for me, and they wanted me to know the message was in the music. And I had no background in music. I wasn't interested in music and stuff like that. But the whole thing there, when I wrote a whole book on it, which my father would laugh if he heard I written a book on music, but it basically came down to the fact that when you've got a child, from the time your child is like born till the time the kid is 10 years old, you are the kid's hero. As soon as the kid's 10 years old and that ego starts to come online, then it's like, Mom, could you walk 10 feet ahead of me, please? And then when they're 16, it's like, Mom, my friends are coming. Could you please disappear? I don't really want you around. And that's because they've got the ego is coming online, the left brain is coming online, and then they're in this situation where they're looking for something. They're looking for identity. What do I want to be? What do I want to do? I want to change the world. They're looking for something. So if you're an alien and you want to influence people, you're not going to take someone when they're 25 years old, because it's like total waste of time. Their ideas are set, their prejudices are set. It's totally waste of time. So you take the kid and abduct him when he's in the crib, and you teach the kid as he's growing up before that left brain comes online. And when the left brain starts coming online, you want to make the message. Who are you going to talk to? Who is a kid between 10 and 50 and 25 years old? Who are their heroes? Musicians. Put the message in the music, and you can deliver the message to that kid as the kid's trying to decide, what do I want to do with my life? How do I want to be a difference in the world? And you put these ideas, and that's what changes it. So that's why I believe they're using musicians to get across the message.
Right. Yeah. And do you think it's this whole left brain right thing is it's in our control, right? It's just because we sit kids in school, tell them to sit still and listen, and we're kind of like programming them, and it's actually like if we let them develop naturally, maybe that wouldn't happen. But how much is it our responsibility that's what we're kind of doing to them, just like maybe not intentionally, but just because it's just this pattern that we've been following. And maybe there are forces who don't want us to know our spiritual nature, like it seems like more and more people are getting in touch with their spiritual nature, but not because it's being something that's, being told to us out in the open. It's kind of like you have to go behind the scenes kind of to, like read books. Like I remember Ken Wilber said, I was so angry when I found out that there's all this amazing spiritual stuff going on and no one ever told me,
Well, I think the problem with that is that it's become a very left brain world. So
yeah.
If you can build a cell phone with your rational analytical mind, well, then you're something. But if you've got some spiritual idea, it doesn't make us any money. So and the world has become really determined that unless you can make money, unless it's, into this physical world, me versus you, good versus bad, duality world, it's really not of any value. And so that's where we've sort of gotten off track, that we have to teach these kids how to make money, how to build stuff. And we're talking left brain all the time.
Yeah.
And people start to believe, or people will say to me, oh, the brain. And I say, well, no, not the brain. I mean, we make these, it's the old idea. We have a bunch of assumptions that we make. It's not the brain. There's at least two sides of the brain, because that's where we learned about the right brain, left brain thing in the 1970s and 80s from people who had epilepsy, and they would cut the corpus callosum between the two brains. And then the brains would fight with each other. And the one would light up a cigarette, and the other hand would take it and throw it out. And this would light it, because the one side runs the one side of the body, and the other side runs the other side of the body. And the hands are fighting and all this kind of stuff. And Michael Gazzaniga, who was the guy who invented the whole concept of the neurology of all this stuff, said there may be 1 million modules in the brain that are independent, working together. And that's a concept that I think that we have missed in the world. Is we believe the Darwinian thing. It's survival of the fittest. We're all, everything's competing against each other. It's exactly the opposite. If you take a look at the human body, you have 80 trillion cells in the human body, and they all work together. They all just do the job they're supposed to do. They're not independent. They don't do their own thing. And when you get a cell that decides it's going to be independent, that's what's called a cancer cell. I'm just going to divide. Don't tell me what to do. And you have 1 million cells that die in your body every second. Every second. 210 different cells, types of cells, and they are all replaced at the right time in the right place. So it's all working together as one. So then you get into the world, and we're into this Darwinist world where we're fighting and stuff like that. And we believe that's the way. So that's the whole idea behind why does New Brunswick have only 2 deaths, and they have 1 million people for the COVID. They only have 2 deaths. Same virus, same evil Chinese virus, whatever you want to call it. They only have 2 deaths. And in the United States, I think it's 610 people per million that are dying. And it's because of the idea of independence, where you're told you got to be an independent, you got to be on your own, you got to be an individual, all this kind of stuff. And what we now have is a situation where we have 80 trillion cells in the Gaia, the body of the Gaia, 80 trillion cells, and everybody's doing their own thing. Everybody's like a cancer cell. Don't tell me what to do. If I don't want to wear a mask, I'm not wearing a mask. And everybody's doing their own thing, which is the independent thing, which we built the whole thing on, instead of the idea if you work together, or if you take like a country like South Korea. Why does South Korea have 51 million people and only 300 COVID deaths? It's because you work together. The one becomes more important. And you may take away civil rights, where you say, nobody can move. It's on your cell phone. You can't get through these things because your cell phone is tagged, you're red, you're under contact, and you have to stay home and stuff like that. And you shut it down. Whereas in an independent world, it's survival of the fittest. And if you die, well, that's the way it is. Too bad. You died. The strong people are going to survive. And that's why I think we have the problems in the world today, is this independence thing is so heavily taught in school. You got to be independent. You have to, if I don't steal Dee's stuff, she's going to steal my stuff. She's an enemy. There's good people, there's bad people, there's good races. Even the other day, someone was giving me this whole thing about evil races. I'm going, this is insanity. Come on. This is called racism. When you say there are evil races of aliens, and what do? We say, oh, the aliens of the 1950s, they're the good guys. They look like us. They were, from Venus and Mars, and they wore suits, and they were, nicely combed hair, and they were good
naked.
Guys. Yeah, and
they were
then you
naked
get the
with no genitals.
Yeah, well then but that's the thing. They in 60s it changes. Then you get the grays. And because they're not Caucasians, they're the bad guys. The Greys are the bad guys. And then you get the Nordics. So then people tell me these things. Oh, there's the fights between the Nordics, the good guys, the white guys, and the dark Greys. And the reptilians are bad guys. And the mantids are bad guys. So anybody who isn't white is a bad guy, and anybody who's Caucasian is a good guy. And then there was these battles. And they say, oh, there's these battles between the good aliens and the bad aliens. And I'm going, are you crazy? Like, aliens are telepathic. So how do you have a war? How do you and I have a war if I know what you're thinking and you know what I'm thinking? And they're precognitive. We all know that aliens can see the future. So you know who's going to win the battle. I know who's going to win the battle. So if I know I'm going to lose, why would I start a battle? This doesn't make any sense. And yet this concept of good versus bad, this duality is there. And I would say the things like, okay, if there's evil aliens, they say, well, come on, there's good people and bad people, and good races and bad races. Okay, so who's the evil race on Earth? Was it really the Jews? Do we have to finish off the Jews? Do we have to go back and say what race is actually evil on Earth? And what you start to learn is there are no evil races. There is only one thing: the belief in separation. When you believe that you are separate, that's when the problem all begins. If you suddenly realize that you could come back, if you die and tomorrow you think the Greys are evil, Okay, so if you die and tomorrow you're born as a gray, are you now an evil person?
Exactly.
People are just people, and you have bad belief systems, and that's what happens is
Yeah.
you have bad belief systems, and that's what makes people do bad
Yeah.
things. So it's good people with bad belief systems. That's what we do in school is we're teaching these kids with these bad belief systems, and once they get to be 25 years old, you can't turn it around. The only way you can turn it around is to put new material into the field, and it'll take years and years and generations for this stuff to come through. And we're getting help from the beings. They're giving material to people, and you're getting it out of the psychedelic field. There's a lot of psychedelic research going on at universities now, and people realize you can get in the field, and eventually it's going to change. But in the end, even in terms of good and bad, in the Newton world, it really doesn't matter. People say, just give me the good stuff. Don't give me any bad stuff. I'm trying to keep my health. I don't want any bad. I don't want to get sick or whatever. And it's in the Newton world, it's all experience. You chose it. And once you decide to take responsibility for the fact that you chose what's happening to you, then the fear goes away. But now we're saying, oh, it's like Hillary Clinton and it's like Trump and all these people are picking on me and I'm a poor victim and people are coming after me. And no, you have to take personal responsibility for life and realize that you probably chose. Or even the thing with the abduction. People say, oh, it's terrible. They're abducting people. That's against their will. And I say, well, no, not if you actually regress the people. So I asked Mary Rodwell, who'd done 3,000 plus regressions in Australia. I said, Mary, if you regress all the people who have been abducted back to birth and ask them, at any point in the past, did you agree to be in this situation? How many people would say yes? She said, 100%. And then I asked Kathy Martin, who runs the experiencer or the abductee studies for MUFON, the big MUFON group. I said, Kathy, what do you think about this soul contract? That people are agreeing, that they actually say that beings are my relatives, that you're agreeing to this. And she said, I always wondered about that. So I had myself regressed. And I actually heard the words come out of my mouth. I agreed to this. And that's the
Yeah.
whole thing. So we're in a world where we're teaching people you're a victim. People are picking on you. You've got to fight for it. You've got to be an individual. And it's those kind of belief systems that have to turn around. And that's, I think, what the intelligence is trying to give us. The message and the two messages, absolutely no doubt about it. Whether you're in psychedelics, whether you're in the UFO world, whether you're in near-death experience world, the message is the same. Oneness is the key message. Oneness is the key message, and everything is made out of love. And as hokey as that sounds, that's the reality of how the world actually works.
Yeah, and that's actually the teaching of the Eastern mystics, thousands of years ago. And also, not just, getting abducted, but any experience that, like trauma that someone experiences, they chose, right? Because the soul wanted to go through that, maybe to develop or whatever it is. But like, it's all been chosen, and understanding that and really knowing that and feeling that, it's so powerful and freeing, because like you said, then you're not a victim and you are in control. So we chose it all. And are you familiar with Dolores Cannon? And she did.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with her. All people who didn't know each other, all saying the same thing, that we volunteered to come here for this. And so it's like a common message. And even with, I guess, the Seth material that. I think it was the first ones that said, we chose our parents, we chose our situation and all that. And so it's very empowering. And actually, then when you hear it, you feel the truth in it, right? Because when you hear the truth, you kind of like feel it, like when you resonate. Like maybe there are people who don't resonate with this, but when you do, you really know it,
Yeah.
And I think I have never felt that I've never felt like afraid of aliens, or I don't like that word either. I don't want to call them our friends or brothers and sisters, whatever they are.
Yeah.
But it's like, we're all connected. We're all one. And so it's really comes to that. And so how much does the school system have responsibility? Like, it's a school system, but also the parents, the children are living in the home of the parents, because we're indoctrinating these children, to not be aware of their spiritual nature and, how free they really are. And hopefully we're moving towards, a society where children are more and more aware of their spirituality. I guess they are starting to teach meditation in schools and things like that now, right? So.
Yeah. I'm not sure the school is the place, because basically what you see now is we're sort of going the opposite way, where, now you can sort of, call down a kid who's a different color or whatever, and that's sort of accepted, which was never accepted before, where we're getting more into this whole duality of me versus you, competition, all this kind of stuff, making money and stuff like that. So that's what school is basically for. And even in the UFO community, you'll find it's almost impossible to convert the UFO community. I mean, if you take a look at the postings that are done, most UFO people are on the other side. They are not love and light. People think they are. And it's actually the opposite. They're into, you see some of the postings that are done about, you know, the racial situations and stuff like that. And I'm going like, and I know these people, I'm going, he posted that. I'm going like, I can't believe this. And that we've gotten into this whole idea that what you see if you go to UFO conferences, the problem with that is that fear sells. So I'll give a lecture at a big conference like Consciousness Life Expo in LA. I'll have 35 people in the room, and then there'll be you know, one of these secret space guys lecturing in the evening, $80 a ticket, and there's 600 people in the room and 100 people standing in the hall. Fear sells, and that's the whole idea. That's how commercials work. Create a need and fill it. So if you're giving the good message, it doesn't come across. And that's where I think things like psychedelics, I think, will change the world, because there's more and more people. And once you've had the experience, you can't walk away from it, because then you know it's like, oh, that's how it works, or the UFO experience that people are having it. But I'm sort of, I got a little disillusioned. But then again, I look at it like all you can really do is, if the Newton world is right, you and I decided to come into this world to do something. So people will say, oh, how come the world's so bad and all this sort of stuff? And I always say, just remember, you chose to come in at this time and this place in the middle of this mess, and maybe you came for a reason to turn it around. So we have to take, it doesn't really matter what happens around us. It's the same sort of thing. We're like victims, like, oh, what, you know, what if we got taught in school, right? And we're looking at all these outside things instead of the fact that you and I can only control what we're doing. And it really doesn't matter whether the world's going to hell in a handbasket or what's happening out there. Even if I say, and people get upset, I say, even if we destroy the world, it's not going to change anything. It's all experience. And you're coming back again, wherever it is, to learn your lesson. And so it's up to us to realize we came in at this time in this place. And when you leave, according to Newton, they only get asked one question. When you go in front of this panel, they only ask you one question. Say, Dee, how'd it work out? Because you planned it. You can't say, the dog ate my homework, I didn't get taught in school, Hillary Clinton destroyed the emails, are going to go, time out, it's got nothing to do with anybody else. You chose all this sort of, how did it work out for you? And according to Newton, everybody says the same thing. I could have done better. So it comes down to, why am I in the world? I'm going to get asked this question when I leave, how did it work out? And then all you got to do is figure out, like, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? Forget about everybody else. I've got something. And it becomes an internal thing, making yourself better, putting it out, and you put it out without any expectation, almost like Bashar. If you've heard the channeler Bashar,
Yes.
You put it out without any expectation of success, and that's when things start to manifest. As long as you're trying to, because the left brain's saying, I got to manipulate this, I got to make it work, and the left brain is trying to figure out how to do this, and it's not a thing you figure out. It's a thing almost like when they do the John Hopkins, the psilocybin stuff, the high dose psilocybin with the cancer patients or with the people who are trying to quit smoking and stuff. They lay you down and they remind you, nothing inside your consciousness can hurt you. Trust, let go, and be open. And that's how the world works. You trust, you let go, and your internal self will tell you what to do, and you go according to the feelings, the synchronicities and stuff like that. That's all you can do. As soon as you use the left brain to try to worry about what this person's doing, what that person's doing, and you're trying to analyze the whole thing, then you're in the same world as they are. You have to realize you are the captain of your own ship, and that you agreed to do something. And it's the idea, remember who you actually are. You're off stage, and Dee is just an actor on stage. And what is Dee supposed to be doing? So people get caught up in the illusion of actually being a person, and they forget you are you are, as Deepak Chopra says, you are the silence between the words. The voice is going in your head, but you're actually behind, you're watching the whole thing. Or people will say to me, oh, I this, I that. I say, well, who's the I? Who's actually, or they'll say the brain. Look, the whatever it is, they say the meditation does this to the brain, or the blood starts to move or whatever. And I say, that's a nice story. It's like Moses opening the Red Sea. That's a really nice story. The blood starts to flow, the default mode network shuts down, the parietal lobes light up. That's a nice story. Who's making the blood flow? Who's turning the parietal lobes on? Who's turning the default mode? There's somebody behind who's doing all this stuff. It doesn't just happen by itself, but people describe it and they say, look at these colorful pictures and look at this all happening. And it's like Moses. It's like he hits this Red Sea with his staff. The Red Sea opens, the children of Israel go through, and then the Egyptians all get caught in the water and stuff like that. Nice story. Now, how do you do the trick? It's fine to describe. He does this, and that's what we do a lot in the world. Is we're describing processes. But and that was one of the things. Are you explaining or describing? So science will come and say, this happens, and I explained it. You didn't explain anything. All you're doing is describing what's happening. Who's doing the trick? There's somebody behind that, which is always ignored in science, because science is into money, it's into here and now, it's into the physical world, it's into reproducibility. And so all you and I can do is to take the knowledge I was influenced very much as a kid. I was raised very religious. I was supposed to be a minister. And in the Bible, it says, too much is given, much is expected. And Edgar Casey, who I studied before I had my sighting, said, knowledge not used is sin. And so that's the idea that you and I, if we have great amounts of knowledge, we're in a worse situation than the people on the street. Because on the people on the street, when you get to the thing, well, that person didn't know any better. You and I knew better. And they'll say, you knew and you still didn't do anything. So that's where we're in a situation where you have to use the information you were given if you know more than anybody else.
Right. Yeah. And speaking of Bashar, one of my favorite sayings is when he said, circumstances don't matter, state of being matters, you know, and it's because we're energetic beings. And when you really, really know that your energy and everything is energy, all you have to do is take care of your own energy, and everything around you is a reflection of that. You know, it morphs, it changes, you know, you can just change the atmosphere in a room or anything, like with your pure energy, you know, and your state of being. And just all we have to ever do is take care of our own state of being. Like, are we centered? Are we, you know, do you see yourself and see your world? That kind of thing, you know. It's like that whole thing about being centered and taking care of our state of being is, and awareness, right? Just awareness is a big one.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So you get two different people. Like, people will say it's outside circumstances that are causing it, and I say no. You can get kids in grade 12, and they all go through the same experience, and some commit suicide, and some think it's the best experience of their life. It's not what happens to you, or I always say it's not what cards are dealt to you. It's how you play your cards. Most people spend their whole life trying to force the dealer to change the dealing of the cards, and you can't. The cards are being dealt to you, and you play the cards.
Yes. Yeah. It's simple.
It's simple, yeah. But you get swept back into the physical world, because you get into, and I have to empathize with people, because I say, you know, if I hadn't had the UFO sighting, if I hadn't had the download experience in 2012 or 2017, I'd be just as stupid as the rest of them. And it's because I had the experiences, and experience is what changes people. And a rational analytical thought, I don't think really changes much of anything. People have their thing, but it's the experience when suddenly you're the guy that's on the ship, you're the person who's seeing the alien, you're the person who has a psychedelic experience, and suddenly you're in a samadhi or a mystical state or whatever. Then it changes. Then it's like, you know, almost like the thing where you can get people, like in the modern world, I think it's like 90% of all people in the National Academy of Sciences are atheists. But if you take a high dose psilocybin experience at Johns Hopkins, they describe this, that people who have had their first high dose psilocybin experience at Johns Hopkins who are atheists, 74% come out the other end and no longer associate with atheism. Yeah. It's the experience that changes it. You can talk to this person until you're blue in the face about the concepts of what people see in psychedelics. It's not until you yourself are in the experience that it changes. So experience is extremely important.
Yes, yes. And it can even happen without drugs, you know, because there's so many ways. And I guess you covered that in your book. You've got about 70, is
70 modalities, yeah.
Yeah.
And some of them are easy. The psychedelics is the one where it's sort of like a sort of a, what do you call it? Like a quick trip in. Meditation, yeah, a lot of, like, that's where it came. You mentioned before the Eastern mysticism. Well, they knew all this stuff 5,000 years ago.
They did.
Or shamans, and you know, that this stuff's been around for a long time. Some of them are harder. I tried lucid dreaming, because lucid dreaming, if you can learn how to lucid dream, be awake in your dream, you can ask any question you want and you'll get an answer. And I thought, wow, would I love to be able to do that? But I could never get into the state. I remember one time I got close, and then you get excited, and I broke out of it. So I tried that. I tried meditation, and I can meditate. I've got a Muse machine that I meditate with, where it reads your brain waves and it gives you either a bird noise when you're on or water noise when you're off, you know, being on focus and stuff like that. And I could do that where I'm in 20-minute meditation. I'm only out of the zone for maybe 20 seconds, but nothing really ever happened. So that was the problem with meditation is if you're doing very deep meditation for 40 years, you can get to these sort of experiences where, you know, with the psychedelics, you're there right away, or head injuries. You don't really want to go through, but a lot of, I talked about savants or people, you talked about trauma, where a lot of mediums are people who have had trauma. So like there's this study was done with Brazilian mediums where I think 15 out of 18 had childhood abuse issues. So I had one girl in Toronto who was a medium, and I was there with this producer from Gaia, and I was trying to tell him this thing, like there's always a trauma event, whether it's a near-death experience, you're in a car accident, and suddenly you become psychic. Even near-death experiences in the UFO field, when you've had the experience, the UFO experience, 50% of people after they've had the experience say they can heal people. Near-death experience, when you've had a near-death experience, 70% say you can heal people. But you really don't want to go through a car accident to get to that state. But I had this girl who was a medium, and I'm telling this guy from Gaia, I'm saying, no, there's a trauma event. As bad as it seems, that's what triggers you. That's what throws you out of this ordinary world you're in into this thing where you suddenly realize what's going on. So this girl came up and she was a medium, and I said to her, oh, let me ask you a question. Can I ask you a personal question? She said, yeah, sure. I said, how was your childhood? Because she was talking about medium and talking to dead people, and she's got this business, whatever. She says, oh, it's terrible. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. And I went to the guy producer. I went, told you so. So then the next experiencer came in. He says, ask him. So we went through this whole thing. But you do see that if you find out, or you'll go back to somebody and you'll say, I'll do this all the time when I talk to experiencers, and they'll say, oh, I just had the one experience. I don't think they're abducting me. I just have them in my dreams. And I'll go, anything weird happened in your life? And they go, yeah, I had a near-death experience at 9 years old, or this and that. And you start to find out that people have had these experiences or trauma events that triggered, or when did you become psychic? And they'll say, it was after I had an operation the one time. And they never near death experience, but that's real dramatic operation. It was after I had that operation that I started becoming psychic. And that's the whole thing, is it sort of breaks that loop. But the thing is, how do you get it? So I have the 70 modalities, but some are easier to get into than others. Right. And, or people have, you know, a lot of them people, I guess, are sort of, they're genetic, like people whose mothers and grandmothers were psychics or mediums and stuff like that, where they seem to pick it up. And a lot of experiencers, and I've had UFO experiences, but I don't know that I've ever been on a ship or anything like that. But and I'm not psychic or anything like that. So I had to resort to going to people who were psychic to get the answer, because that's all I was interested in, is the answer. And when I heard that, you know, somebody had flown the ship, then I go, tell me about it, you know, or that 40% of people knew the answer to everything in the universe, the same as happens in near-death experience. People in near-death experience say they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And that tells you, if that's true, all the answers are in the field. And it's how do you get in the field? Whatever technique you use, if you can get in the field, you can bring the answers back.
Yeah. And the field is also where the healing comes from, doesn't it? It's like, because it's like the unified field, and it seems like you can tap into it, and that is where the healing, it can heal.
Yeah, it would almost be, I think it would be the thing that we create the blocks, that the energy is there and we're creating the blocks. We create our own. It's not, again, it's not like, oh, I was so unfortunate and you know, unlucky, I got cancer, whatever. You got to realize you may have planned this before. I'm going to get cancer because I need to learn this, and that you're creating the block. And so what you're doing in a field is you're releasing the block. Like I was trained on the Bankston method, if you know the Bankston method, and he apparently was an experiencer too. At the end of his life, the guy he learned it from was a psychic, and the psychic says, I'm actually I'm an alien from Alpha Centauri, and you came with me on the guy. I did not. And you came to teach this method. And what they use is the same method. I don't know if you've ever heard it. And this is something that's actually used in UFO experiences. So you see these crossovers. So in the UFO experience, if you've ever listened to Susie Hansen tells a story. We are taken below into a big amphitheater, and there's 200 to 250 people in this giant amphitheater, and they show, boom, this environmental image on the screen, and another one, and another one, another one. And she says, they're going faster and faster and faster. And she says, the people are all crying and they're seeing all these environmental devastation images on the screen. And she says, there's over 100 a second going on the screen. And they taught us how to do it. And when it's over, the being comes, he puts his hand like this, and everybody calms down. Everybody stops crying, but the image is still in their head. So you get a lot of experiences who are environmental activists, animal rights activists, and they see the screen on board the ship and they're forced to see these images. So when I saw that, I said, that's the Bankston method. What the Bankston method is they say, okay, Dee, here's what you do. You take 20 images, but they have to be ego images. It can't be, I want to save the world. You can't be wishing for that. You got to say, I want a new house and it's going to look like this, and it's going to have big rooms, and I'm going to have a new car and it's going to look like this, and I'm having a motorhome and I'm going on a trip to, and you imagine all this stuff, but it has to be ego images that attract the left brain. And then what you do is you take the 20 images and you start to what they call rapid image cycling them. So you learn, and they teach you learn messages, and you're thinking these images in your head, boom, 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 and then you go faster and faster, and they get this drum and they're going faster, and you're imaging it, and then you take the images and you put them on a clock, and then you spin the clock, and they can go 2,000 or more images a second in your head, and it's going and you're sitting there, and then you do the healing. And what he says, it's to get the healer out of the way. So what you do is you're using the ego images to attract the left brain. And it says, left brain is going, oh, this is so cool. Look at this. Oh, it's so cool. And it's into these images, and it goes for coffee. Same as if you talk to Desta. Desta says when the left brain comes in during a hypnosis, they say, we understand you want to help. Could you please go to the side? We'll talk to you later. We're working here right now. And you get the left brain out of the way. And that's the thing is, so when you get the left brain out of the way, then the energy can flow. And Bankston called it getting the healer out of the way. And it's the same process. It's shutting down the left brain. And that's what I found in these contact modalities. It's all shutting down the left brain, whether it's through meditation, through hypnosis, head injury. Even if you've seen the thing with Jill Bolte Taylor. Jill Bolte Taylor is this neuroanatomist. If you've seen her lecture, where she has the left brain hemorrhage, and there it's not meditation or drugs or anything. It's the blood flows in the left brain and it shuts down all the circuits. It overflows the circuits. And she said the left brain is online, and it says, you got to do something. We're in trouble here. You better do something. And then the left brain shuts down, and then she's in this oneness of the universe, and she's as big as the universe, and she's saying, this is so cool. And then the left brain comes back online. You got to do something. We're in trouble. And then she goes back in the right brain again. The left brain floods shuts down those circuits and says, this is so cool. How many neuroanatomists can actually watch themselves having a stroke? This is so cool. I'm watching. And that's the whole idea is you shut it down, and the right brain, which is the female brain, can tap in. And that's why I say women should take over the world. The sooner the better, before the world is over, because it's a left brain male, urinating contest. Me versus you. If you hit me, I hit you back 10 times as hard. That's the mentality we have now. It's this competition thing, and the way we work it is the more you have, the more. So kill more animals, do all this kind of stuff, rape, pillage. Everything's just an object. There's no spirit behind anything. So animals are just objects. We can pollute the rivers, we can do whatever we want, because it's just about how much am I going to get. I'm the center of it. And as long as that's going to happen, we're putting the world off a cliff. It's the end of it. Unless the female brain can come in and change it to this idea like New Brunswick, where we're shutting this thing down. And you may talk about individual rights where we're shutting this thing down, and they only had 2 deaths. Once the one becomes the important thing, and you realize Gaia, whatever you do to Gaia, you do to yourself. Or what the beings will say about the nuclear weapons, that's why they came so much in 1947, was because we think, oh, you just detonated a nuclear weapon, we'll kill 100,000 people, no big deal. They don't realize that the entire universe is affected by us detonating a nuclear weapon. It's all one thing. As this Ben Rich said when he was asked, and the guy said, everything in time and space is connected. There is only one thing. It's all here. It's actually even the idea that I'm starting to go to is there is no out there. They're not coming from out there. They're coming from inside yourself. It's all within yourself. There is only one thing. The idea of space and time may be an illusion that we think that they're doing this sort of stuff. Or when you have a near-death experience, you go inside yourself. When you have an out-of-body experience, you go inside yourself. You move to a different vibration inside yourself, and we are all in the same one thing, and it's just changing vibration. We're not really going anywhere. You like that, eh? And that was taught by the Buddhists like 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. They realized that through meditation, that when they opened it up, that's how it worked, and they called it Maya, the illusion. It's the big illusion. And now we realize, we used to think, well, they're stupid. The Eastern, who wants to listen to a Buddhist monk? He can't build a cell phone. He doesn't have a car. Who cares about what he's sitting in a monk? And they had all the information. It's just we're now realizing, because the world is on the verge of being destroyed, that this energy is almost coming back in to try to shift the thing before it's too late. And I say it's a right brain world, a female brain that has to come in and take over. Otherwise, it is over. And then again, even if it's over, it doesn't matter, because reincarnation is a fact. And it's like I say, people will say, oh, I have a problem with this race, or I have a problem with that race. I say, don't worry, reincarnation takes care of it all. You don't get to be the white guy with the silver spoon in your mouth every time. Everybody's going to get to be a kid in a cage on the American border. Everybody's going to get to be floating around and die as trying to escape from a country. Everybody's going to get to starve to death. We get to play all the roles, and it's all about learning lessons. So enjoy it while it is. Learn whatever it is your opportunities and your fallbacks are, and figure out, why did I choose to have this situation, and what can I do to make the world a better place? And that's all you need to do.
Yeah, and it's and speaking of the Buddhists, it was a Buddhist I heard say that, when you when you're sleeping and then you're dreaming, and then you have a dream and it seems really, really real, and then you wake up and you go, oh man, that dream was so real, I really fell for it. And they go like, well, that's what happens when you die. You go, oh man, that life seems so real, like I really fell for it, This is another level, a layer of it. And also there's that thing too about that, they say in the quantum physics that it's all happening simultaneously. So, this thing with our multidimensionality. So we're actually having all kinds of experiences all at the same time, because in essence, there's no time, right? Or even space. Time and space are even inside us, right?
Yeah. They're just,
you have to have them in order to live a human life. That's the main board, basically, right?
And that's what we're starting to learn just in the last 100 years through quantum physics and through people's experiences, is that the world is much more complex than you think it is.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of, just Big Bang and all these particles banging into each other and stuff like that, that's so passe, it's so nonsense. And yet what you have is the top people in the world still believe it, because it makes cell phones, and the people are very reticent to change. It's almost like impossible to move somebody unless they've had an experience.
Yeah. Did most of our technology come from our interstellar brothers and sisters, or
well, again, it's whether it's all coming from within. So
right.
it may be, playing the role of a thing, but a lot of it came in my my inspired book. A lot of it was stolen from nature. So like Velcro is probably the prime example, where the guy's got his dog out, and the dog's got all the burrs, and he's going, how do I get rid of these stupid burrs? And he's looking at him with a magnifying glass, and he goes, hey, that's pretty cool, I should build that. And he makes Velcro. And so I can't remember what the name for it is, but I'd say probably half of the stuff that we have invented, all pills, aspirins, everything comes from nature. That we're just taking nature stuff, and whoever gets to patent it first makes the money. But you're just taking this, and there's whole departments in companies that look at nature to try to get inventions. Like how does a tree push sap up 150 feet up into the tree? How does that happen? Because pumping water up a hill takes a lot of energy, stuff like that. And so there's that, and then there's these download things where people will go through the work, and you have to go through the work, and you set yourself up, and then you have to, is the old idea, trust, let go, be open. And one of the things, if you fall to the stars, one of the guys they're doing a DNA experiment on experiences. They're looking at their DNA and at their brain structure to see why does this person have contact with aliens and other people's don't. And the one guy who's at Stanford, runs a lab at Stanford, on cancer things and like that, he said, I don't know how it works, but I know how to make it work. And so he goes through all the problems, and then he does exactly what musicians do, and what a lot of people do, is you run through the whole problem, and then you write down the question and what you want answered. You put it beside the bed, and he says, I wake up in the morning and the answer's in my head. And that's the kind of stuff, is you have to let go and then get in the field. As long as your wheels are still spinning all the time, you're not really getting anywhere, because you're trying to analyze it. You're just, or David Bohm said, most people call it, I'd have to paraphrase, most people call it thinking or investigation. Actually, it's just reorganizing your prejudices. And that's what people are doing. They're just rearranging all the same stupid ideas they had before, and think if you put A, B, C, D, and then you put C, A, B, D, then it's going to be different, and trying to do it that way. And it's this new stuff that comes in when you can get in the field, the Akashic field, whatever you want to call it. It's all there. And it's the ability to let go, get in the field, and help get yourself. But you are in the field. You are a spark of God. You are part, and you are actually running yourself. Or like, if you remember, Mark talked about it. Our friend Mark, where we met at his house, he talks about this thing where he has this UFO sighting, and he gets this impression, I got to go outside. I got to go sky watch. And he goes out with his laser, and this thing goes by, and he goes, bloop, and he shoots with his laser. And he asked this psychic, and he said, well, who was inside the ship? And she said, there's nobody in the ship. What do you mean? There's nobody in the ship. You sent it to yourself. And those kind of things really change it. It's sort of like when we start taking personal responsibility for the fact that whatever's happening, even if it's wrong, even if it's not the way it works, if you take personal responsibility for everything that happens to you and say, why would I choose to have this? All the fear goes away, and you start taking responsibility, and you do what you have to do, instead of, as long as you're a victim, as long as you feel that somebody outside you, or some influence, or some part of God, or the universe is picking on you or whatever, you're done. If you're a victim, you're never going to get out of that problem. You have to take responsibility for it. And I think even psychologists, people would say, that don't believe the paranormal part, will say, yeah, it's true. You've got to take responsibility. Otherwise, you're never going to solve your problems.
Right. And especially when you understand it's all happening inside of you anyways, right? So
that's the big one that I think that even myself, I have a hard time sort of grasping. That was the one and people say, no, that's not what I meant. But John Wheeler, who was the guy who won the Nobel Prize for physics, came up with black holes and with wormholes. He's the famous one that said, there is no outside. There is no out there. And people say, that's not what it means. And it's like, well, yeah, I think that is what it means. There is no outside. There is no out there. And the other thing he said it's a participatory universe. And that's the idea that nothing happens until the observer, the dual slit experiment, that when the observer looks, the experiment changes. And that's the whole idea, that nothing comes into reality until it's observed. So you are actually creating what you're seeing. And for a lot of people, even myself, you go like, wow, I mean, I don't know if that's true. I mean, it's like, it gets really, really down to the fact that you are really controlling exactly what's happening around you.
Yeah. And like, people will say to that, well, I wouldn't create this, this horrible thing that's happening. I wouldn't create it. But its thing is like, well, you're doing it with your energy. Like, you might not be doing it with your what you want, like, or whatever, but like, if you're energetically, just how people misunderstand the law of attraction, right? Thinking that, oh, well, I just have to think about something, whatever. No, it's about your energy. What are you aligning with energetically, vibrationally? Like, what's your frequency, and it's that's creating it, not like, oh, well, I want to live in a big mansion, and so how come if I create my reality, why aren't I living in a big mansion, right? It's because that's not what it means,
Yeah. And we're actually about to do an interview. We're doing an interview with 3 people. We did it once already, and we didn't get the tape properly, but I ran into a guy who does a lot of, one of the modalities he uses fasting, and he uses float tanks. So he goes into float tanks, and he can actually, the voice is talking to him even before he's in LA. He starts talking to him before he gets in the float tank. So at one point, he got this idea in his head that basically said, everything is perfect. This is a Newton idea. Everything is perfect. Everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. Everything that is happening, you have a part of this. You are saying, this is what we want. And you just think, oh, I just want the good stuff. You have this false illusion, and everything is perfect. And he said, I was so embarrassed because I'm thinking about, you know, Adolf Hitler and all these sort of things. And it's like, how could everything be perfect? It can't
Right.
be. There's all this bad stuff. And he said it came with absolute certainty, which is, I know that experience, absolute certainty. And he was so embarrassed. He never told his wife. He never told anybody. And then suddenly I have a girl, she's a regressionist out of Edmonton, and she's on one of my rabbit holes and she tells a story. I go, that's the same story. And so I contact her, Julie Parker's name. I said, Julie, can we interview you sometime? You got the same story. And she was reading a book. And then the third one we have in this interview, we've got 3 people on this interview. And the third one was a girl in the 1970s. It's actually 50 years since it happened. She's on a motorcycle and there is an accident. She goes flying off and basically takes her whole face off on this motorcycle. So that's the whole question is, if you're looking and say, well, why would I choose to do that? And she looks back and goes, yeah, I chose that.
Yeah.
That's exactly, and the whole thing, everything's perfect. And she had this near-death experience. So I have these 3 people, and when you have them tell the story, it's 3 different modalities, but they're all telling exactly the same story. Everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be. Don't worry about it. Just do what you have to do and stuff like that. And the world is taking care of it. It's almost like if you've ever seen you've seen the one with Dennis McKenna, Terrence McKenna was the big guy into the DMT and stuff like that. So Dennis McKenna was his brother, was a pharmacologist. So Dennis McKenna's down, he's doing ayahuasca in Brazil. And he tells this whole story how he just gets, you know, because ayahuasca's a lot about nature and all this kind of stuff. And Mother Ayahuasca comes and he sees the rainforest being destroyed, almost like Sting, the musician from The Police, has the same experience where he starts putting millions of dollars into the rainforest. You realize we're destroying the rainforest. And so Dennis McKenna has the same thing. He's, oh my God, we're destroying the rainforest. I got to do something. And he says, and he's all freaking out after he comes out of the experience. And suddenly the voice comes back to him and says, what are you thinking? Like what? You think we're going to let this happen? You monkeys just think you're running the show. And it's this whole idea that it's happening, and we sort of think that we've got to control it, but that's the left brain wants to control everything.
Yeah.
And when you let go and realize that whatever happens is experience, because people want the good and the bad, so they see this duality. But in the reincarnation world, there's no good and bad. It's just experience. You chose it, and you're learning lessons. And it's not about how many toys you can get, how many cars you can get, or whatever. It's about the experience that you're evolving, and that we're all coming into the world to help the world. Whereas we think that we're coming in here to get stuff. And that's why people would say, well, why would the aliens come to help? Well, because when you get out of the capitalist world that we live in, and you realize everything is one and it's all connected, that's what you do. You try to make the universe a better place. You're creating the one. You're doing that kind of stuff. We just lost the idea of one and realized it's separation, rape, pillage, kill, and steal. Whoever's got the most toys when they die wins. That's the way we've got it. But we're only 1/1,000,000th of 1% of even our galaxy that believes that kind of nonsense. And the rest of everybody believes that, almost like a beehive. All the bees are just doing what they're supposed to do. And when the queen dies, they immediately create even though they've never done it before, because they only live a couple of weeks, they all suddenly start making a new little cell that's big enough for the queen, and they start feeding it the royal jelly, and another queen is formed. And that everybody knows what to do. They're all working for the one. We're the only race of all the animals, of everything in the universe, where we say it's about me, it's about separation and stuff like that. And I guess that's the duality that we create. And it's not good or bad. It's just eventually we'll get out of it, and we will evolve and realize that the one is the basic lesson. It's all one thing, and love is the basis of the universe. And there's nothing to worry about. In the end, when you die, it's unconditional love. There's nobody condemned. There's no hell, that sort of thing. And so enjoy be grateful for what you got, like the gratefulness meditation, and the compassion meditation. Compassion for people who are suffering, thankfulness for what you got, and do what you can, because you came into the world for a reason.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And so many of the people who channel, well, like the messages, they seem to be coming from these galactic brothers and sisters, right? And so many of them say that we came here to remember, like we deliberately forgot who we were so that we could go through this process of remembering, and that also that every one of us who is here on earth right now is very brave, because they say like it takes a lot of courage to choose to be born to be a human, because humans, they got a pretty choppy waters,
Yeah.
and so it's a brave thing that we're doing, and that our journey is to remember who and what we are, and also that thing about everything being perfect as it is. It's like death is not a tragedy. That's an interpretation, because it's like there is no death, right? Like once you're a soul, and you exist. And so like anybody, when, statements like, oh, that shouldn't have happened, is kind of an arrogant statement, right? Like if everything's a perfect world, because it's like anybody who comes and spends a shorter amount of time here as a human and, dies earlier, it doesn't mean it's a tragedy. When they say like, oh, so-and-so tragically died, at the age of 85 or something. It's like, are you serious? They live a long life, and they're infinite being, it's
Or if you look at the near-death experience thing, like nobody wants to come back. They're all fighting, like, no, I'm not going back there. It's like, and you see it from a completely different perspective. And that's the thing, is when you enter that world, and that's where Newton's material is so important. When you're out of the physical thing, you realize how it works. And that's what you've got to listen to, people who are in that field, who will tell you this kind of stuff, because that's the real world. We just have the impression that we're in the real world. And my 2017 download experience basically said, you've got it all wrong. Everything you believe is wrong. It's exactly the opposite of what you believe.
Yeah. And I just, a friend that I used to work with, she just passed away at 70. And when I heard the news, I thought, oh, good for Linda, because I remember Linda, like about 5 years ago, told me she was on an operating table and she had a near-death experience. And she said, like, it was one of those where she didn't want to come back, which is pretty typical, right? And she just said, like, I'm so glad I had that experience, because like, I am so not afraid to die. And it's so beautiful where we're going, and so when I heard the news, it wasn't like, oh, did you hear the tragic news that Linda died? I was thinking in my heart, way to go, Linda,
There you go. She's finally free. Yeah, that's the thing.
And you got to experience that thing you were waiting for again, but.
Sure. That's sort of an advantage that, people should be grateful for, where you get in the field, wherever you're doing, where you suddenly realize like it's eternal, and that you lose that fear, because she had it. And then they have it with, they do it at John Hopkins with the psilocybin, where you have to be less than 6 months to live, and they give this high dose psilocybin, and the people come out and they're as happy as can be, and they have no reservation about dying. And that's the whole thing. It's very hard to change people's opinions, and so they have that. But most people have to sort of struggle with this belief system, where they think it's the end, and it's the ego that doesn't want to die. It's not really the person.
Right.
The ego is saying, no, Dee has to survive. I mean, Dee's gonna evaporate or whatever. And yet when you go back to it, Dee and Grant are just characters on the stage when you really realize it. And the ego, you have to sort of put it in its place all the time, because it'll drive you nuts, and it'll throw the world off the cliff. And that's what's happening. The ego is running the show. It's a very left brain world, and it's my ego versus your ego, and ego wants as much, and no, don't tell me what to do, and that's where the problems come in.
Yeah, and there's that Buddhist saying that if you die before you die, then when you die you won't die, and the thing about like the ego death, because it's like all psychological suffering comes from identifying as this individual human, right? And it's all person based, right? And so it's like, the way to get rid of any psychological suffering is don't identify as that's what you are, is that little human who's having this brief experience. That's not what you are. And as soon as you switch your identity, or, that question of, the big meditation question, you sit and you just keep saying, who am I? Who or what am I? Who or what am I? And you keep meditating on who or what am I? And you totally realize I'm not this person. And that's the person that suffers. So it's just letting go of that ego. And again, that comes from that left brain, right? Is what it is really. And when you were saying about women running the world, you kind of meant the feminine, right? Because males and females have feminine and masculine in them, right?
Yeah, but it's the like the left brain is where the language is,
right?
Left brain is where the ego is. Left brain is where the left brain interpreter, the skeptic, is, and the right brain, which has always been associated with the female, is the one. And so the idea is the one that taps into the oneness of the universe. And so female energy is more like, it's a family. Let's take care of the family. It's not like, let's go to war, let's go fight people. It's more like, we're all one. It's that that
Right.
maternal idea. So it's so it's the idea of stopping the left brain from controlling it and getting that other message across. Because right now it's left brain dominant world, where it's all about competition. It's all about let's get back to business, let's make money, let's get some more toys. Or even the aliens. It's like, let's shoot them down. We'll put them on an alien reservation, and we'll have some new technology. We'll get their technology. We'll have some new toys. It's all about this left brain thing. Whereas the female brain is more going to be into we're all one. We're all this kind of stuff. And the female has been sort of, apparently in thousands of years ago, it was a female dominated.
Yeah.
But now it's very male dominated, where it's even, I know people very close. It's like, why don't these women just stay home and take care of their kids? And I was like, really? It's like, holy cow.
Well, and there's a thing too, like, when men see a UFO, it's shoot it down. When women say invite them for tea,
Yeah.
Why do you have to
Exactly.
shoot them? Like that's a fine howdy do. Who wants to come and visit a place where they want to shoot you when you come? Like, no wonder, And
Yeah.
one more thing, I think we're running out of time, but I was just going to ask you was that this thing about, people say, well, why don't they just come and help us save the world? And it's like, so many people that are channeling them, they're saying, you're the ones who have to do it. We're not going to do it for you. Like we'll support you and we'll, give you guidance, but we're not going to come down and save your world. You have to do it yourselves, although we'll support you, right? So that,
Yeah.
I think
Sure.
that too, because some people are waiting for them to come and save us. And
Yeah.
we don't need any kind of savior of any kind, whether it's a religious leader or anything, right?
Sure. Yeah, it's a basic principle. You can't go in and do your kid's homework. I mean, you can go in and
Right.
go to school for your kid, do all his homework, write his tests, and where does the kid go? Nowhere. The
Yeah.
Canadian government, actually, the guy who ran the Canadian government claimed he was in contact with the beings. And what somebody told me a story that they said he had told them, and that was the being that they were dealing with. His name was Alpha. And Alpha said, he was talking about the nuclear weapons in the 50s. They're all talking about stop the nuclear weapons and stuff like that, that this affects the entire, universe and stuff like that. And Alpha had said, the only time we'll ever interfere, we'll ever step in, is if there's a nuclear exchange. And we will stop a nuclear exchange. And we can prove that we can stop a nuclear exchange. We could take the moon in front of the entire world, split the moon in half, and put it back together to prove that we could actually do that. Other than stopping a nuclear war, we will allow the human race to stew in its own juices.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. It's like,
And
and that's why I say, like, it really doesn't matter. So people say, well, we might die or whatever. And it's like, there is no good and bad things. It's like, if we destroy the planet, it's just another lesson. We're gonna keep coming back until you do it right. And there's a lot of planets. There's a lot of the God can create all sorts of new things. And it's the mistake we make is believing that we can get away with it, that we can do stuff and not be responsible for it. Everything that you have. That's why I always say, whatever you are afraid of, whatever person or race you hate, get ready, because you're setting yourself up to come back. Because I worked at, Slow Mission. I worked at Slow Mission for 15 years. And there was a minister, a guy who worked as a chaplain in St. Boniface Hospital. And he told me the lesson, which I always learned when I first went in there, because I was very scared. You're going to the North End. It's a very scary area. I parked like a mile away so they wouldn't destroy my car or whatever. And you have all these illusions of what this is like. So I go to Siloam there, and he gives me the lesson. He says, look, Grant, here's what I want you to remember. Take a look around the room. There's like 400 people in the room. He says, just remember, nobody planned to be here. They didn't say at 5 years old, I think I'll be a homeless guy when I grow up, or I think I'll be an alcoholic, or I'll be a pedophile or whatever. These things just happen. And you have to realize that they're just people who have made some sort of decision, with separation decision. They've made the wrong choices here and there, and that they're learning just the same as you and I. And if you look down on them, then you have a situation where if you look down on Slow Mission homeless people, get ready, because you're going to, when you die, you're going to have knowledge of how it works, and you're going to go, man, I really messed up on that. You know what?
yeah,
I think I need to come back as a homeless person to learn sympathy, empathy, and understanding. And that's the way it works. People don't realize. They think, oh, I'm just going to keep being a rich white guy and I'm going to have more houses the next time I come back and stuff like that. It's like, no, it's all about learning lessons, and that whatever bothers you the most in life is probably what you're going to come back and learn the next time around. So be careful who you put down and who you have scorn towards, because that, and even like in psychology, it just shows that you have that side, you have that missing inside yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why it affects you. That's why it bothers you so much. And when you have unlimited knowledge, you will make the decision. I'm going to come back and have a motorcycle accident and go face first into the ground, or I'm going to get raped, or I'm going to have this or whatever. And people can't see that happening. But according to Newton, he's done 7,000 regressions, and now there's a bunch of people he trained. He's dead now, but there's 35,000 regressions, and everybody basically tells the same story. And that's the story that the Buddhists told, is the idea that, you know, it's a reincarnation world, and it's a world of learning lessons, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing.
It is.
Well, thank you, Grant, so much. It was so much fun talking with you.
Beautiful. Yeah, wonderful. And we'll have to do one with you where you tell me your story. I was quite impressed with when you started to talk about this. I go, what? Because luckily I'd asked you just before we left, because otherwise I wouldn't even have known. And you said you had you had your mothership sighting
Oh my God.
Bridge, and I'm right there. I live just
Yeah, isn't that funny that it was the same spot? Yeah. Wow. Wow. That was, it was so big. And just anyway, is there any final thoughts before we say goodbye for now?
No, I always remind people the basic lesson is all you have to do, whatever your belief is realize that we all came into the world and we're all going to leave and be asked, how did it work out? And all you have to do is figure out, why am I here and what am I supposed to be doing? And hopefully some of the things I said today will help people on that answer to that question.
Wonderful. That's great. I love it. I love it.
Beautiful, Dee. Thanks. And I appreciate your starting a new podcast. That's what we need, is you put the material out with no expectation. And if synchronicity is a thing, the right people will see it, and it will expand. And you're doing your mission here on earth. And anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I loved meeting you, Grant. Awesome. We live in the same town. Okay. Talk to you later. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Bye. Bye, everybody.